Our next speaker is Asha de Vos, who's the Sea Award winner this year. Asha is a Sri Lankan marine biologist, ocean educator, pioneer of blue whale research within the northern Indian Ocean. She calls the population of blue whales in Sri Lankan waters the unorthodox whales, because through many years of research, her work has shown that they are simply different. Dr. de Vos founded Oceanswell, Sri Lanka's first marine conservation research and education nonprofit. The Sri Lankan Blue Whale Project, which commenced in 2008, is the first long-term study of blue whales in this region and is Oceanswell's flagship project. The research de Vos conducted through this project has led to many key research publications and is used to inform policy at the local and the global level. She spent many years in academia with degrees from the University of St. Andrews, University of Oxford, and the University of Western Australia. She's the first and only Sri Lankan to have a Ph.D. in marine mammal research, the first Pew Fellow in marine conservation from Sri Lanka, and also is the first National Geographic Emerging Explorer from this small island nation. She's a TED Senior Fellow and Ocean Conservation Fellow at the New England Aquarium, a Duke Global Fellow in Marine Conservation, and a World Economic Forum Young Global Leader. Her life's work is to change the current marine conservation model, protect this unique population of blue whales, and inspire the next generation of ocean heroes from all corners of the globe. So with that, Asha.
Good morning, everyone. I'm completely inspired by everyone else, and that's a tough act to follow. Thank you very much. But I do have the largest living animal on the planet that we live on, so I'm going to run with that right now. All right, so first of all, obviously, thank you very much for being here this morning, taking time off work to come and support and encourage all of us, and it is quite the privilege to be standing here speaking to all of you. To tell you my story, I'm going to take you to a much nicer climate. I'm going to fly you all the way to the other side of the world, the beautiful tropical island of Sri Lanka, where I come from. And I'm going to take you back to the year 2003. Not that long ago, but still. So it was, I suppose I haven't started. Here we go. Oh, it's the wrong view. All right. I'm just trying to create some suspense, you know? You're with me? Yeah, good. All right, so let's go to 2003, beautiful tropical island of Sri Lanka. So at this point in my life, I was working on a whale research vessel, and it was circumnavigating the globe, but I was working on it only in the Maldives and Sri Lanka. And it was this expedition, which was, so incredible for me. We were basically tracking sperm whales by dropping underwater microphones in the water called hydrophones. And we were eavesdropping on these sperm whales, and then we'd find them and take these small biopsy samples from their bodies that could tell us about the toxicology of the ocean environment. While we were doing this, we also always had an observer up on deck, because, of course, you want to take as much data as possible when you're out there. And on this particular day of significance, I happened to be the person who was on observation. It was a stunning, flat, calm day off the southeast coast of the island. Not a drop of wind, as you can see. There's not a ripple on the surface. It's beautiful to look at, but absolutely sweltering hot to work in. But that's okay. This is where the story begins. So I'm standing up on deck, looking out for this pod of sperm whales that we'd been tracking for about 24 hours. I knew exactly what I was looking for because we'd been tracking sperm whales for a little while. A low, bushy blow that was slanted off onto the left-hand side because sperm whales only have one nostril or blowhole on the left-hand sides of their heads. So they're quite easily recognizable out at sea. And I could hear, their sounds emanating from the pilot house below, because we would play their sounds when we collected them through our microphones into the pilot house. And 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, we could hear these clicking sounds of sperm whales. So I don't know just to give you a sample. So this is what we could hear all day, all night. And I knew they were out there. And I was standing up on deck. I was coming to the end of my kind of watch time. And I was straining my eyes because I really wanted to see them. But I looked and I stared, and it was sweltering hot, and my time was coming to an end. And then I cast my eyes off to the distance, and that's when I saw this. It was a tall, powerful vertical blow that rose all the way to the sky, as far as I could tell. And I knew immediately it wasn't a sperm whale. You can see it's not slanted off to the left-hand side. So I got incredibly excited. I grabbed the walkie-talkie that was dangling in front of me, called my captain. I was like, Bob, we have to go. 11 o'clock, 2 kilometers, let's go. And he says, why? And I say, I think it's a blue whale. So he says, okay. And he turns the ship. And now at this point, what you need to know is that I was the deckhand on board. I was polishing brass and cleaning toilets. I wasn't a scientist. But here I am. I've now changed the whole course of this research expedition to go see something that I may have seen. So obviously, I'm now in a panic. I'm staring out. I'm trying not to blink. I'm staring into the sun. We're moving a bit faster. The wind's in my eyes, tears streaming down my face. And as we're getting closer and closer, I start to think I'm actually losing my mind. Because it wasn't just one blue whale, but there were 6 blue whales in an area the size of a soccer pitch. So obviously, correct reaction. I was exactly the same. I was like, what is happening? Because, this is the largest animal that's ever roamed the planet. It has 70% of the planet to roam. Yet it was aggregating in this small patch of ocean, warm waters, which are typically considered unproductive. And obviously, I wanted to know what was going on. So I was fresh out of undergrad, and I started thinking about everything I'd learned. And then I remembered, large whales, like blue whales, undertake long-range migration, feeding areas, and warm breeding and calving areas. I was super stoked. Because I thought I was going to be the first person in the history of our planet to ever see blue whales mating. I know. Who wouldn't be excited? It would be a spectacle. Anyway, they are the largest animals to ever roam the planet. I'll leave it there. But so we start moving forward, right? And of course, I'm like encouraging my captain. I'm right in the front of the ship, the boat. I'm hanging off the edge because I literally want to be the first person to ever see this. And we're getting closer and closer and closer and closer. And that's when I realized it is not at all what I'm expecting to see. There's no hanky-panky going on, no blue whale penises in sight, no mating, no babies, none of what I'm expecting. So I'm a little bit worried because I've thrown us off the course that we're supposed to be on. But anyway, I look at my captain and I'm like, do you think we can hang around a little bit longer? And he says, sure. And I'm glad we did, because that's when we saw this. This, ladies and gentlemen, is a pile of blue whale poop. It is magnificent to look at, I know. It is the most beautiful poop in the animal kingdom, and if you ever want to challenge me, I'm good with that. Just send me evidence. But the reason I got so excited when I saw this was because I realized that if these animals were pooping, they were feeding somewhere close. But remember what I told you at the start. I said large whales go to cold waters to feed and warm waters to breed and calve. And if you look at a map of the world and you find Sri Lanka, you'll know that we are just 5 degrees above the equator. It's as warm and as tropical as you can possibly get. That moment, I realized these whales were doing something different. They had adapted to feed in these warm waters that we thought were unproductive. And so it became my eureka moment. This was the moment that launched, the first ever long-term research project on blue whales called the Sri Lankan Blue Whale Project. Not everyone can say that their career started with a pile of poop, but mine did. And it also has earned me the title of one of the worst jobs in science, whale feces collector. But I beg to differ. I'll tell you this. My secret is that I have a freezer full of whale poop in my house. But, obviously it's been an incredible career. In the intervening years, I've learned lots of things. I've learned that these blue whales are really unique. They're the only population of non-migratory blue whales in the world. So they never go to cold waters, which I fully understand. But they live all their lives within that red circle. They're in warm waters throughout their lives, so they've adapted to living in these conditions. I've learned that there are about 5 populations of blue whales around the world, but I've learned that my blue whales are what we actually call pygmy blue whales because they grow to about 80 feet and not 100 feet. They have a different acoustic dialect. So if I took a blue whale from Sri Lanka and I dropped it in the ocean off California, where you also have blue whales, these animals wouldn't be able to communicate with each other. I've also learned that poo is really valuable. It tells me so many things. I've just published a piece of research to look at what these animals actually feed on. And what we found, which I think is super interesting, is that globally, blue whales feed on krill. Everywhere in the world, they have this one species they feed on, and that's what we always talk about. But as it turns out, the blue whales in our waters feed on shrimp. Now, it may not seem like, if you don't know the difference between a krill and shrimp, it doesn't seem important, but the point is there are implications to what they feed on. And for years, I've been watching these whales do this. They lift their tail flukes up before a deep dive more often than anywhere else in the world, about 60% of the time versus 15% of the time anywhere else. And I kept speculating and thinking that, oh, maybe it's because when they lift their tail flukes up, they streamline their bodies and they can torpedo themselves deeper into the ocean. And actually, by doing the poop research, what we found is that the species of shrimp they feed on is actually deeper in the water column than the other species that the blue whales everywhere else are feeding on. So it makes sense. So it sort of became this piece of this jigsaw. So I'm building on that. The great news is that in the waters around Sri Lanka and the northern Indian Ocean, we've never really had any countries engaging in whaling or killing of the animals. But in the 60s, there was illegal whaling by the Soviets, and they took out almost 1,300 blue whales from this small region over, we say, 4 seasons, which was the equivalent of about 60 days in total. So a huge number of these giants were just taken out of the oceans. And so we believe that that's made a big dent in our population. The good news is, of course, since no one's whaling, that's not, in that area, that's a good thing. Whaling in general isn't the biggest problem faced by whales around the world. There are a lot of other threats in our oceans today. And in our parts of the world, the biggest threat that they face is what we call ship strike. Typical scene in our oceans, you have these beautiful animals swimming around and these massive container ships going quite past. And this is a map of global ship traffic. What's immediately obvious is that there's a lot of noodles on the page. Don't worry. Focus in on the yellow lines, because the yellow lines show you where there's the densest shipping highways in the world. And if you look at the area around Sri Lanka, you'll see that the south coast of the country is home to one of the busiest shipping lanes in the world. It's the main artery through the Indian Ocean. Everything from Singapore to Dubai travels through these oceans. While global ship traffic has doubled since the 70s, around this part, it's quadrupled. So trade is changing, and this is something that's going to exacerbate, obviously. But, one thing I point out at this point is that I'm not pointing fingers at the industry. I know that 90% of everything is shipped. We're all part of this problem. But my whole thing is, why can't we be part of that solution? And there are ways to resolve this. If you look at some of the data I've been collecting, just to give you a taste, you'll see the red lines are actual ship traffic data, so movement data of real ships. The black dots are where we've seen blue whales over time. And what's immediately obvious is if you look at the south coast of the island, there's distinct overlap between where we see the whales and where we see the ships. So obviously sites like this are not a surprise. This is a blue whale that came into the main harbor in Colombo, wrapped on the bow of a container ship. It was killed on impact. We know that because it's a fresh carcass. 12 days later, we found another carcass with a massive propeller gash. Now, evidence like this is not always available because obviously carcasses sink, they get pushed offshore. But off California, where they've done more extensive research on this problem, they know that we found that for every individual that we find dead, 10 others go undocumented. So it is a big problem. But it's not unresolvable. Like I said, there are things we can do. And through the science that we've been doing, one thing we've found out is that 90% of the vessels that use this pathway are just in transit. So if we shift shipping lanes 15 nautical miles offshore, we can shift where the whales and the ships overlap. And that's obviously a good thing for the whales. The whale watching industry uses these waters, so it becomes safer for the whale watching industry, it becomes safer for the fishing boats, and also we can reduce ship-based pollution to coastal communities, which is a commitment we've made by signing an international agreement. On top of that, the 10% of vessels that come into nearshore waters, if they slow down over designated areas, we can actually really reduce the impact, because if vessels travel at less than 14 knots, impact is not lethal. So there are solutions and there are ways to get around this problem, and we have the power to make that change. But, I don't want to end with doom and gloom, so I'm going to tell you, there's always reasons why we get so passionate about these things and what drives us. And I have many reasons why I do this, but in particular, one of the things I do is photo identification. So, I spend a lot of time on boats. This is me working, honestly. And I take photographs of whales. It's a hard job. And I take pictures of particular body parts and then look at characteristic markings that can help me to identify and re-identify individuals over and over. So these are the key body parts that we use for blue whales: tail flukes and dorsal flanks. And you can see that in 2011, I took this photograph of this particular tail fluke off the east coast of the island. It's beautiful, it's very well marked, very characteristic. And as soon as I took it, I thought to myself, I think I've seen this animal before. And before I started my work, I actually, there had been only 2 publications 30 years before about these blue whales, so nothing until I really launched the research. And I went, thankfully there was only 2 publications, because I just rifled away through, and I found this. Correct? Same whale, 27 years later. So it's the oldest known blue whale in the entire northern Indian Ocean. And it's really neat. It uses a simple technique to basically collect these photographs that can give us real answers about important scientific questions. And this whale is called Valentine. And where I saw it, what I think is really neat is where I saw it off the east coast of the island in 2011 was just about 10 kilometers away from where it was seen in 1984. So I don't know what the whale did in the intervening years, because we don't have any evidence. It could have gone on holiday, who knows. But the point is, this is such a powerful tool. And what's cool about it is now we're like trying to launch a campaign to get tourists. There's so many people out on the water, and if they sent us in their photographs, imagine how much wealth of information's there and how much more we can do in advanced science by getting more people on board. So I have started the only marine conservation research and education nonprofit in the country. And my whole endeavor is about, basically, I always say, when I die, I don't want it to end, right? Being a marine biologist in Sri Lanka is really, really rare, and we can talk about that later. But the point is, I want to make sure that there's more students coming into the fray. I want marine conservation to become more diverse. 70% of our coastlines are actually in developing countries, but wherever I go for meetings or conferences, representation is next to 0. I'm usually the sole representative from that 70% of the world. And that's not how it should be. Because if we want to actually save our oceans, every coastline needs a hero. And those heroes have to be local heroes, people who are from the area, can speak the language, can sit down for a cup of tea with the communities, and who are there
All right, one quick question. Are you only tracking the animals with photography, or are you doing any sort of electronic tracking at all, or any other sort of?
So at the moment, we just use the photography because we've had a lot of government restrictions on doing invasive work, which is anything that uses attachment devices or anything. To be honest, when I started this work, most people didn't know there were whales in the country, so it's been baby steps. Now the government at least has a conversation with me, and so we're getting to the point where we can start to do more advanced stuff. So also funding, but also it's really getting the permission on the ground. That's always tricky. Yeah, so that's an excellent question. If you ever look at a humpback whales make it really easy because they're black and white, and their patterns are very easily recognizable by machines. Blue whales, they're just elusive in every single way. So they have these mottling patterns that are quite subtle, and they make it a little more difficult. So there are people who've been trying to work on that. So everything we do is by eye. So every time we take a photograph, we have to go sit down and go through all the photographs that we have in our catalog. But I can tell you, it's actually a really exciting thing to do because it's kind of like being Sherlock Holmes. You know, you have this little clue and you want to find out who it is, and so yeah, it's pretty exciting either way. But yeah.